back, we're live. I can't tell you how long I have waited to say that, Jay. I'm here today in the studio at 888 downtown Honolulu with my good friend Jay Fidel, who's actually on the Big Island for a change. So today it's Jay and me. It's fantastic to be here with you today, Jay. Let's have a rip-roaring good time.
Okay, well, I came over here for July 4th. I attended the Arakaki family picnic in Hawaii, which was huge, really a great statement of the Kohala Coast up there. And we had a wonderful time, and we're back, and we're at the airport now, under a tree, a monkey pot tree, in the parking lot of the Kona Airport, spending our time with you, Marco, with my cell phone, running Skype attached to the dashboard of our rental car. That's the way it is here on ThinkTech. We find a way.
The wonders of the 21st century, Jay. I leave it to you to continue to forge new ground in bringing important messages, certainly to the people of Hawaii, if not the rest of the world. So let's go at it.
Absolutely. So, Marco, what do you want to talk about today? Let's talk about your trip to to that very special plane, the solar. What was it? The solar
Impulse.
Impulse. I've been following that carefully, and I am so sorry that I wasn't in Oahu to see it when it came in. What an exciting! You were there. Wow. Gina, tell us all about it, please.
No, it was fantastic, Jay. I wasn't actually there for the landing, which took place the wee hours of Friday, but the sponsors, which included the Swiss government and Swiss corporations, including Schindler, they make elevators and escalators, amongst other things. ABB, which is a very large Swiss electronics and engineering firm. Omega, they make watches. Moet Hennessy, which makes, amongst other things, Moet de Chandon, one of my favorite French champagnes. So they hosted quite the event yesterday in the Kalailoa Airport, one of the hangars there. The plane was there, which has a wingspan as large as a 747. It has completely covered with high-efficiency solar cells made by SunPower, if I'm not mistaken, and is powered by 4 electric motors. And what's really incredible about this particular adventure is that this will be the first plane, assuming they can complete their 24-hour, but their circumnavigation of the globe. They started in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and that's where they will end, God willing, in terms of continuing from Hawaii to the mainland U.S. and across the Atlantic. But this would be the first ever solar-powered flight that will have circumnavigated the globe. And of course, the sun doesn't shine at night, so they have to have a power source during the nighttime hours. So the plane climbs to a maximum altitude of somewhere over 25,000 feet during the day, and then at night slowly kind of glides down under power to maybe 5,000 feet, relying on lithium-ion batteries. So it's going to be a while before you and I will be able to get on a solar-powered plane to fly back and forth between the islands here, let alone across great distances of ocean. But I was particularly struck by how the Wright brothers, 100 some odd years ago, started a new age in aviation and transportation, and few people had much of a clue what would happen in the years and decades after the Wright brothers. So these two Swiss pioneers, André Boschebel, and Bertrand Piccard, spoke to the assembly yesterday, and I was really excited to hear what they had to say. They each spoke for about 10 minutes. I didn't find their presentations canned at all. And it reminded me, Jay, it really reminded me of why what I've been doing over the past 37 years in renewable energy, why it's been so important to me. You got to get wrapped up in the day-to-day grind of being a business owner, running a contracting company, but these two gentlemen spoke of the need to continue to push boundaries and to explore and to continue to develop and implement more sustainable policies and philosophies on this planet if we were to last longer as a species.
Fabulous. But somehow, green energy, clean energy, it requires public support. It requires people to be aware of it, not forget it, to keep it high on the priority list. And it requires kind of let your imagination fly and believe in it as the future of our global society. And it strikes me that this flight goes there. This flight shows everyone in the world what clean energy is capable of doing. How very exciting. Did people talk about that? Did you have thoughts about that?
Well, these folks are really this whole project, and these two pilots in general. They're really pioneers when it comes to, and ambassadors as well, when it comes to spreading the gospel of renewable energy and sustainability. And I think that's one of the most important messages that we have to hear, both here in Hawaii. I mean, very specifically, of course, our own energy situation and our incredible dependence, dangerous dependence on imported fossil fuels, which has been lasting as long as fossil fuels have been around in the development of the economy here. So it is a message that needs to be heard, and I think that's one of the reasons why these two individuals are so passionate and so dedicated to get this message out. And they were, and you know, I've been around long enough where I can tell if somebody's giving a canned speech and really kind of saying something by rote. And I found these two guys to be very genuine and very heartfelt and not at all kind of going on a script. And I can tell you I need to hear that on a more frequent basis, given the challenges of being a small business owner and a renewable energy contractor here in Hawaii.
Yeah, you know, it also is a statement for solar, for the potential efficiencies of solar. Maybe solar will be more in the next 5 years. These guys were using high efficiency solar, and also for batteries. It's a statement for batteries. So I think it gets your blood going faster to be there and to see how it works and to think of the possibilities. If we can fly around the world in this kind of plane, then certainly we can put electric vehicles on the highway. Certainly we can wean ourselves off fossil fuel in a relatively small state, on a small island. It does get your blood going faster. But one of the things, though, Marco, is about solar. I think we have to put solar in perspective, too. And, of course, there are a lot of solar issues. Solar seems to be at the center of clean energy in Hawaii today. It seems to be an important issue in the NextEra merger with Hawaiian Electric. So many things flow out of the way people perceive solar, the way our regulators perceive solar. So can we talk about the solar industry for a minute? I know you regularly compile numbers on the solar industry. What are your latest numbers? How are we doing in Hawaii?
Well, great question, Jane, and very timely, because yesterday I just crunched the numbers for the first 6 months here on Oahu in terms of PV permits, which to me is one of the telltale data points, set of data points that I keep track of. And essentially, first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year were all but identical, both in terms of the total number of PV permits pulled and the total value, the stated project value of all those permits. The total project value is somewhere right around $110 million, $110 million for the first 6 months of the year. So if we were to continue on Oahu for the next 6 months at the same clip, that would be $200+ million. And so, I mean, clearly solar PV is a very substantial industry here in Hawaii, and that's only on Oahu, which is the main driver, of course, as far as volume. But the numbers were pretty darn similar to the first 6 months of last year, and you could look at that and say, well, you know, we live in an economy and in a mindset where growth, quantitative growth is either you grow or you die. But it's good news that we were able to at least get to the same numbers as last year, because prior to March, the PV permit numbers on Oahu had been going down month over month, not month over month, but year over year on a monthly basis for the previous 2 years. So that trend, that negative trend, that downward slope finally bottomed out in February. And March, April, May, June, we've had 4 months of growth of PV permits issued this year compared to the same 4 months last year. So that's definitely a good sign.
Well, Marco, I mean, with all the excitement over the plane and the notion that solar can do amazing things we haven't even thought of, it is a bit of a disappointment to see that we're stuck, if you will, on a lower growth than we were before in developing solar here. It's only a little over 10% now. We have 90% to go. This is not exactly what we had anticipated. It was going like gangbusters a few years ago. Now it's simply not. And I still don't. I always ask you this question. I think I ask you this question every time we talk. Maybe you have an evolving answer for me. Why? Why don't we have the same kind of growth in solar that we used to have? What happened to us?
Well, that's kind of the big question, certainly, that I've been chewing on these past several years as well. And you could look at it from several perspectives. One is kind of the pure market perspective, that there reaches a point when the consumers who are most likely to purchase the product or service have already done so, those who are inclined to do so, and that we're on the downside of the adoption curve. That's one. I'm not saying that's necessarily completely persuasive, but that's one slant on it. Another very identifiable factor is that, as we've spoken about many times, and you just alluded to it, approximately 1 out of 10, 1 out of 9 residents of the state, homeowners in the state, have a photovoltaic system, and we are far, far, far beyond the national average in terms of per household adoption. And that has led to strains essentially on utility companies here, which we have, of course, Kauai Island Utility Co-op, which is independent on Kauai, HECO here on Oahu, Maui Electric for Maui, Molokai, and Lanai, and then Hawaii Electric Light Company, HELCO, for the Big Island, is that these utility companies are pushing the boundaries and going where few, if any, utility companies in the US at least have gone before, as far as incorporating rooftop solar to the volume that we have, and not really knowing where that definitive red line is somewhere out there in the future that will necessitate a pause as far as adopting or allowing more PV to hook up from the grid. And we don't even have to look too far in the distant future. We are seeing this today on the island of Molokai, where since approximately the beginning of the year, 6 or so months ago, as far as I know, there have been few, if any, new grid tie rooftop PV systems that have been approved for Molokai. Why? Because they have an unprecedented level of penetration there, where if on a sunny day during non-peak demand or low power demand hours, which are typically between, let's say, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., there is simply too much power being fed into the grid, and you don't want to keep on pumping more power into a finite grid when there's no place for it to go, because you run into problems, and if you don't pay attention to the problems, you can have a catastrophic failure, and that's something that no one wants to see happen.
Well, it strikes me, we've had this conversation, and I have a new thought now, just out of your comment, and particularly given my discussions with local people in the Big Island over the past few days, is that, could it be that people resist new installations, or they are not doing installations they might otherwise do, because they are concerned about the common good, because they, my notion of Mahayana, concern about the common good. Could it be that they're sympathetic with, the argument or the concern expressed by Hawaiian Electric that you can pass a point where it will not work, pass a point where there will be some catastrophic failure, and that they would prefer to hang back right now and not take us there? because nobody knows exactly where the point could it be that they care about the common good, and that is why, or one of the factors why they're holding back.
Jay, you are telling me something I honestly have never thought of before. I think that's a novel interpretation, and if you have been speaking to people on my beloved Big Island who have been expressing that type of concern to more kind of altruistic concern, which is less so focused on reducing your electric bill and more focused on the overall good and well-being of the community. I had not heard that before. But if that's the case, that I would see that as a good thing. But I think more predominantly, there is a concern over the grid situation, over grid penetration, and kind of an example of the law of unintended consequences is when Hawaiian Electric announced on January 20th that they were seeking to end net energy metering, which has been around since July of 2001, which means if you have a net energy metered system, you are able to get full retail credit for all the power produced from your rooftop PV system. They're seeking to bring that to a close. And they asked the PUC for an expedited decision of 60 days, and the PUC decided that that wasn't something that they were going to do. But what, in effect, trying to bring NEM to a close, HECO trying to bring NEM to a close, had the exact opposite effect of what they intended, and that was a multi-fold increase from homeowners and business owners across their service territories to get into the NEM system, so to speak, before the door closed. So here they're trying to bring NEM to a close for reasons I understand and happen to agree with, and their actions brought about a multi-fold increase on an average basis of people who wanted to go NEM.
That's so interesting. You know, I mean, I think they were trying to be nice to grandfather it in the first place, try to avoid, a protest reaction. So they grandfathered it to preserve it, and now look what happens. I've been thinking that NEM was not really fair for a long time. You pay $16 to $17 a month, and effectively, you're supporting, and by being not a NEM customer, you're supporting the NEM customers because they have a retail price on what they're selling back, and frankly, it all seems unfair to me. And I have wondered why it existed in the first place. It was a great way to get people onto the system in the first place, but I think in recent years it's proven that it should be sunset, just as a matter of fairness to people who don't have solar. To me, Hawaiian Electric is trying to do the right thing. It was trying to do the right thing in grandfathering, and I understand that didn't work. But I agree. Whoever is saying we're going to terminate NEM, I certainly think we're going to terminate NEM sooner the better. And I would not give a grandfather on it. I would simply terminate it. So that everybody's treated the same way.
Well, we're going to find out more soon because the NEM issue is kind of taking front and center stage to some degree, or at least more so than it has in the past. It's now under the Distributed Energy Resources docket, or DER docket. And last week, Monday, the HECO companies and the other interveners on the docket, including the various solar advocacy groups, filed their positions with the PUC as to what they wanted to do or see done with NEM. And the commissioners were hoping there would be a consensus amongst the parties to come up with a common approach to move to a post-NEM world. But unfortunately, that was not the case, and it's going to have to be hashed out amongst in the commission in terms of what to do post-NEM. But I mean, this doesn't sit well typically with my PV colleagues across the state, but I too believe that net energy metering is a time that, as a program, it's a time that's come and gone. Back in 2001, when it first started, the installed cost of PV systems was easily 2 to 3 times that amount of what we have today. It was a needed jumpstart, a needed incentive, a needed subsidy for homeowners to go rooftop PV, to be able to as well establish a nascent local photovoltaic industry. And it is a subsidy which is, as you alluded to, essentially you have 10 or 12% of Hawaii homeowners who are being effectively subsidized by 80% of non-NEM utility customers. And it's high time for a more equitable system, I believe, an equitable tariff.
What are the parameters these days? My recollection is that originally, in approaching this change, Hawaiian Electric proposed that the connection fee, which is now 16 or 17 cents, be raised to 55 cents, and there was resistance to that, pushback to that, and then they dropped it to a really very modest increase of about a nickel, and there's still some kind of resistance over the nickel. So one of the issues is how much should the connection fee be to be equitable, and another issue is how much should Hawaiian Electric pay the NEM customer back for how much should the Hawaiian Electric pay the customer back for power that the customer is effectively selling from his PV system back to the utility. Right now, I think NEM customers get retail, which is pretty high, considering they don't really, generate the electricity. I guess they generate in terms of the solar installation, but they don't have a distribution system. They have to care for it, and getting retail is a pretty high price. So the question is, what are the parameters now of the discussion? What are people asking for in the filings they're making it at the PUC? And thus, where is it likely to go? So I put both of those questions to you, Marco.
Well, it remains to be hashed out, Jay. And what I think is clear is that whatever the post-NEM tariff brings, it'll be less than the retail rate. And one thing I think that a lot of folks who are in this business don't seem to really properly acknowledge is that any power produced by a rooftop PV system that is consumed on site, in other words, by the loads there at the home or the business, and it does not get exported into the grid, that customer, that utility customer, will still get full retail value because it's offsetting what they would otherwise have to pay at a full retail rate if they didn't have a PV system. So the debate is over, well, what about surplus power? How much should the utility customer, the NEM customer, the post-NEM customer be credited? If it's going to be below retail, then should it be as low as the avoided cost, or should it be something in between avoided cost and retail? And I believe that is what the HECO companies propose, that it be more than avoided cost, less than retail, and there's pushback from the industry, PV industry, on that. They want a greater value for surplus power. That said, it's really important to note, I think, that when you look at the economics in terms of return on investment and payback, going to a post-NEM, or perhaps call it a transitional distributed generation or TDG tariff, will only have a relatively marginal effect on the return on investment in terms of the payback period for homeowner purchasing or financing themselves a photovoltaic system. If the payback period right now, let's say if they can fully amortize tax credits, is let's say 4 to 5 years, going to a TDG tariff is only going to increase that perhaps by a year, maybe a little bit longer.
One comment comes to mind, and that's this. In a pure sense, for people who want to have the benefit of the clean energy provided by solar, and if they stay off the grid, they have essentially no economic deal with the utility. If they come on the grid and they want to have the insurance of a connection then they pay the connection fee, which has been, minimal up till now. But I think if you add on to that the notion that they're going to sell back to the utility and make, sometimes hundreds of dollars a month at retail, that's windfall. That's windfall to a proper. I hope you agree with this because you're a solar guy at the end, but that's windfall to the solar customer. Does he really need to do that? Is that, it's been a great sales tool over the years that solar installers have been installing. But in fact, it would be just as well if he didn't sell anything back. And maybe one solution here is to give him nothing, but not charge him a connection fee. It just strikes me that we don't really need to have to sell back to have a benefit.
No, I agree. In fact, there's an illustrative example, for example, of what's going on in Kauai, where NEM, net energy metering, has not been available for a number of years now. And what in effect has been happening as of late is that PV contractors have in effect been oversizing photovoltaic systems beyond the kilowatt hour per month demand of the customer in order to generate more kilowatt hours at a lower compensation rate in an attempt to essentially offset the overall bill. I'm not really sure if I'm explaining this all that articulately, but it had the unintended effect of trying to bring them to, or actually bringing them to a close for KIUC is that you've got PV contractors who have been oversizing systems where these customers are generating, at the end of the month, they have surplus power. So NEM was not ever designed to have ratepayers get into the power generation and sales business to the utility. It was meant to offset their own power demand. So it's, I guess on some degree it shows the ingenuity of people in my industry in terms of trying to sell bigger, more expensive systems when at times they shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, but the regulatory system, and for that matter, the way NEM was set up in the first place and has perpetuated that whole concept. It's a culture point. You sell as much as you can, and you wrap that around NEM so that you're actually selling the homeowner more than he actually needs for his own home. And I agree with you absolutely, Marco, and I hope the PUC takes this all into consideration when they make their ruling. We don't need to have a million generators out there selling power to the grid, especially at the rates that have been charged. One question I want to ask you, though, and that is, whatever happened to the feed-in tariff? There was all this hubbub a few years ago about the feed-in tariff, and it was going to be the successor, or at least a parallel track to NEM. Now, whatever happened to it?
The feed-in tariff, that's the story of all but the best intentions after years of effort not going the way people had hoped. And as of October 2013, since October 2013, if I got the date right, the feed-in tariff was brought to a close across the HECO territories, in other words, frozen, and there are no plans that I know of to resuscitate, revivify FIT and turn it into FIT 2.0. So it turned out to be less than stellar in terms of bringing on new PV capacity into our island's grids. There are a number of FIT projects which have gone in, a number of FIT projects which will continue to go in. But when you are talking about guaranteeing a payment of X cents per kilowatt hour for 20 years, and with the background of PV costs going down and utility scale PV projects being able to provide to the utilities 20 years worth of PV power at a substantially lower rate, it really calls into question the benefit of FIT. Aside from the benefit to the investor, the owner of FIT, has been guaranteed a payment from the utility company for 20 years at a preferential rate, while the cost of large-scale PV continues to go down, down, down. So it didn't quite work out as well as intended.
You know, it's interesting, Marco. We knew going back, after 2008, we saw as we were developing various forms of renewables in the state, and some of them were more promising and then less promising, and it's all been an evolution and a lot of adventures and twists and turns along the way. But the most interesting twists and turns are the regulatory ones, the legal ones, the incentive ones. And we're still not finished tuning that. We're not finished tuning the NEM concept or the lack of it. We're not finished tuning, exactly how the utility deals with the homeowner. We're not finished tuning the tax credits, and I would like to talk to you now about the tax credits, which are actually hanging out there as a low-hanging fruit for tuning. You can't have tax credits going on forever. We have to be more sensitive, more akamai. We have to look into the future more carefully. We can't let any kind of incentive credit go forever. We have to see the effect of the credit. I mean, this was clearly proven in the case of Act 221 for the tech tax credit. And unfortunately, in that case, it ended too early. But in the energy, some people argue that the energy tax credits, the solar tax credits, are ending too late. Is this on the deck now? Is this being discussed?
Well, clearly, I mean, we don't have a legislative session going on right now. It only lasts from January to May here in the state. So there may be discussions going on amongst the legislators in terms of what to do for the new session, but we're still a number of months, obviously, away from that. But state tax credits, state renewable energy tax credits, as far as I know, there was very little discussion this past session to do anything in terms of putting a sunset date, because right now the state renewable energy tax credit has no sunset date, which just to remind people, there has been a solar tax credit here in Hawaii in some form or another since 1976. So as of next legislative session, that will make 40 years of a solar tax credit in some form. And candidly, Jay, I have mixed feelings about tax credits and about energy subsidies, and I teach this stuff, so I drill down fairly deep into trying to get a better understanding so I can communicate this to my students. But for example, from 1950 to 2010, a 60-year period, there were somewhere over $800 billion, with a B, $800 billion, both in direct and indirect subsidies to various energy forms from local, state, and federal government as far as incentives go. $800+ billion, with the large bulk of that going towards oil, natural gas, coal, nuclear, and then renewable energy is on the tail end of things. So one can certainly make the argument that renewables have been getting the teeny tiny slice of the pie for a very long time in terms of subsidies. And I'm well familiar with that argument. I've used it myself. So there being no such thing as a level playing field, then is it not only right and proper that we as an industry and as a cause, the renewable energy cause, an industry, should fight for its small piece of the pie in face of the giants, the gargantuan conventional fuel industries that are getting the vast majority of the pie. So I know that side of the argument very, very well. But at the same time, I mean, you can always make claims that, well, another party is getting more money than you are, and therefore you're entitled to get the subsidy that you're getting. So I am torn on the subject, but I believe that as an industry, given the fact that costs have come down so much over the past years, given the fact that there is truly mass adoption across our state, I think it is high time to have a discussion on coming up with a new state tax credit that does two things. One, it ramps down over time in terms of from 35% to 30%, 25 and so forth, and that there be a sunset date on it. But as we well know, in our legislative system of government across the states and in Congress, committee chairs have an inordinate amount of power and authority to decide what bills are heard and what bills never see the light of day. So it's really going to come down to the Energy Committee chairs in our House and Senate and the Money Committee chairs in our House and Senate, as well as of course, the governor at the end of the session.
Yeah, we have a change in the Senate, change in the chair of the Senate Energy Committee. Do you think that will affect anything?
Well, I'm not gonna speak for my friend Lorraine Inouye, and I do really consider her a friend and an incredibly capable person and an incredibly capable senator who has had a very committed career in public service over the years. So I know Lorraine has become very popular since she ascended to the chair position, so to speak, as far as all kinds of individuals and companies seeking her time to, shall we say, educate her from their perspective.
Now let's talk. We have a few minutes left, Marco, and we'd be remiss if we did not talk about it. Hawaiian Electric and the merger with NextEra. I have to tell you that my personal survey here in the Big Island, this is on the Kohala Coast and in the west part of the Big Island, has demonstrated to me that most, if not all, of the people I've caught, and asked this question, have said that they like the merger. P.S. And this is very interesting. All the people I've caught, including a lot of Hawaiian people who said they were Hawaiian, like the TMT deal too, by the way. So what you get from the protester group is not necessarily a reflection of what you get from the ordinary folks you talk to, in the course of daily life or daily travel anyway. And I feel that to the extent that we have protests going on and some pretty shrill rhetoric against Hawaiian Electric these days, I've been a sort of feel for Hawaiian Electric these days because of that rhetoric. The fact is that a lot of people in the state are just fine with the deal with NextEra. I think it will bring the capital, bring additional expertise, and make things work better. And in fact, give us lower rates, believe it or not. And I wonder. I mean, you're on the east side of the Big Island. Maybe it's different for you, but what I see here on the west side is actually a picture that's different than what you see in the media.
Well, there's always a lot to be said, I think, regarding the proposed merger. A couple of key dates are coming up. 2 weeks from today, July 20th, the interveners, the 29 interveners, of which the Hawaii Island Energy Cooperative is one of those 29. The 29 interveners will be submitting testimony to the PUC, which will be, in my view, something of an early preliminary indication of where they stand, sit, or sit to the side, or in the middle, to the left, to the right, on the merger. And then the next date will be August 10th, and that will be when the State Consumer Advocate, Jeff Ono, and his office will be submitting testimony as well. So by mid-August, and all these documents, by the way, or most of the documents are a matter of the public record and are available to anyone who has an internet access to go to the DMS data management system on the PUC website can see and read these testimonies. By mid-August, we'll have a clearer idea of the interveners who are positive, negative, and neutral, and just as importantly, where the state's consumer advocate stands or sits, at least preliminarily. I mean, we're still, if you look at it from the point of view of a 4-quarter football game, we're probably somewhere in the beginning of the second quarter. So there's still a long ways to go, and still there are going to be IRs and information requests and responses that will continue to fly for weeks to come.
Well, I wish it could get over. Actually, I think my sense of it, in a larger sense, is that the pendency of this issue and the long process around this issue actually holds other things up. It's just nobody wants to do anything, take an initiative, and everything is sort of sitting around waiting for some action on this issue. So, I think we're in a kind of stalemate. You can disagree right now, waiting to see what happens.
I wouldn't describe it as a stalemate. I just see it as the continuing process in what would be one of the, if not the most important acquisitions in the state's history, and since the 1800s, when King David Kalakaua granted a franchise to the first utility company. I believe it was in 1891. So, I mean, there is really no bigger deal, and there has been no bigger deal than one of the oldest, most venerable, most important companies in the state that has been around for a very, very long time, that is being sought by a much larger company 4,800 miles away. I mean, it is a big deal. And there are so many ways you can slice this pie. The merits, looking at the merits and what NextEra brings to the table is certainly one analytical perspective in terms of their know-how, their financial resources, what they've been able to do with utility scale renewable development on the mainland. And they can make, and they have been trying to make, a strong case for why they are very, very capable and very, very able to do things in a bolder fashion here. So that's on a merit-based argument, but you look at it from the political perspective, and the type of press and the tone of many of the IRs from many of the interveners, they've had, in my view, over the past 6 months, they've had a challenging time. They've had a challenging time being able to get the merits part of their case, their argument, clearly articulated and clearly delivered and clearly understood by the people of the state. So it's a textbook example, one could say, of how challenging it can be for an outside entity, no matter what the degree of resources they bring, and no matter what the degree of strong, honest commitment they bring to try to do things bigger, better, bolder over here. The challenge that companies like that, individuals like that have in a state that is by its very nature rather insular, isolated, and has something of an embedded suspicion and sometimes hostility towards outsiders.
Wow, Marco, I agree with that, and I'm sad to see them going through all this what really is political harassment. This should be a pretty easy approval one way or the other, and I think a lot of the rhetoric has been name calling without any foundation, rational or otherwise, and I think we really have to get on with it. And I'm sorry to see them being criticized for things they should not be criticized for. I agree with you about that, and I hope we can get through this. We lost a lot of credibility on Wall Street in Super Ferry, and not only in Super Ferry, but in the continuation of Super Ferry. Notice there is still no Super Ferry. The TMT thing is costing us enormous credibility in many circles, including Wall Street and the consortium of science circles, and we're losing credibility there. And when you lose credibility in these circles, you don't get additional foreign investment. We can't have, any real economy without a free flow of investment from offshore. And if we wind up putting these guys out for reasons that are not rational, for reasons that are political and not either rational or scientific, then I think we're going to have a permanent black eye, and we'll never be able to walk down Wall Street again and command any kind of investment. So, this whole deal to me is a tipping point. And of course, as you and I have discussed over the years, energy is the highest priority. You travel a little bit, you come to the Big Island, you take a clear look at things, you look around and you realize something you already knew, namely that energy is the most important priority the most important initiative of our state, and we cannot afford to do politics as usual.
No, I agree. I agree, Jay. And I think, as you mentioned, TMT, which of course has been getting a lot of press over the past weeks. If you look at how the proponents of the TMT have developed and executed their strategy over the past 7 years, aside from the impossibility of them simply folding their tent, well, of course it's possible, but that's something that they want to consider doing. You can make the case that they did pretty much a textbook example of doing everything right, in my opinion, as far as outreach, as far as education, as far as meetings. And I'm not taking a position that TMT is right or wrong. What I'm observing is that I think there can be no better example of an effort, a strategy, an executed strategy of trying to get it right and do it right for this telescope and still be beaten. Because if you look over the past several months, the first round in April, when the construction started and Goodfellow was chased off the hill essentially by the protesters/protectors, and then just a couple of weeks ago when they started to, when they were going to restart, that round also went to the protesters/protectors. So the point I'm making simply is that it is possible to come up with a sensitive, thoughtful, clearly defined strategy that makes sense from virtually every perspective, looking at it and execute it, do it very well, but still end up losing. And that, if that happens with TMT, or if it were to happen with the NextEra HEI deal, it's going to be based, the decision is going to be based less on the merits and more so on the politics.
Yeah, remember that not 3 weeks ago, we got our latest big black eye with the survey that found that we were the worst state in the union for doing business. We can't afford to do that. I mean, it's going to be pervasive in all financial circles around the world. We can't afford to do that. It will have a profound damage effect on us. Anyway, Marco, I think we need a progress alliance to handle all these issues. And I know that you and I can serve in that alliance. Looking forward to further discussions to advance the cause of progress.
Well, Jay, I can't tell you how much a pleasure it's been to actually sit in your chair, in your studio, and talk to you while you're there in beautiful Kailua Kona. And I look forward to the next time, whether it's me and Kona in front of the camera, or whether it's the two of us here in your fabulous new studio. But it's been a great pleasure, and I hope we can continue the tradition.
Thank you, Marco. Aloha.
Thank you.